A millionaire arrives at his mansion and becomes desperate upon seeing his housekeeper crying, hugging his son next to his Ferrari. But when he discovers the reason they were there, his world falls apart. The stifling Wednesday afternoon weighed on the coastal city, a humid blanket that seemed to suck all the energy from the air. Richard Montgomery, the most powerful magnate in the region, felt an overwhelming exhaustion in his bones as he stepped out of his armored Mercedes. Hours on end in complex negotiations to close a multi-million-dollar deal had drained every fiber of his being. His mind, always sharp with numbers and market strategies, longed only for the refuge of his mansion, for the gentle scent of his son in his crib, and for the promise of a brief respite. However, the silence that greeted him as he walked through the main door was not what he expected. No childish laughter echoed through the grand halls, not even the sporadic cry that marked the presence of his little Benjamin. A spike of apprehension sent an icy chill down his spine. The crib, to which he hurried with long and increasingly urgent strides, was empty. Outside, in the manicured garden that stretched to the imposing walls, the afternoon for Ana Lucia had been routine, like so many others. With a damp cloth in hand and the scent of lavender in the air, she polished the marble statue in the corner of the garden, her thoughts distant, absorbed in the small bills she needed to pay at the end of the month. Her face, marked by a life of hard work, hid an almost premonitory sensitivity. Suddenly, a movement in her peripheral vision broke the monotony, a slender, agile shadow leaping over the side wall of the property. Ana Lucia's heart gave an unsteady lurch. She knew Richard had temporarily dismissed the electronic security and guards, a capital adjustment to curb exorbitant expenses, while a new investment had yet to turn a profit. Panic began to set in. Instinctively, she hid behind a dense bush. Her small body trembling, her breath caught in her throat, she watched the intruder force the kitchen door with frightening ease and disappear up the stairs towards the second floor, where Benjamin slept. In that instant, reason gave way to pure instinct. Ana Lucia didn't think about the consequences, her humble position, or the social chasm that separated her from her employer. The image of the baby, helpless, alone, dominated her thoughts. She ran into the house, her heart hammering against her ribs like a frantic drum. She took the stairs 2 at a time, the sound of her shoes on the marble steps muffled by her desperation. Upon reaching the room, she saw the door ajar and the figure of the man bent over the crib. Without a peep, in a silent act of courage that surprised even herself, she grabbed Benjamin, who woke with a small sob, and pulled him out of the crib. The intruder turned, his eyes wide with surprise and fury. But Ana Lucia was already running, the child clutched to her chest, seeking the fastest escape route. The garage, Richard's red Ferrari, a symbol of his wealth and international business success, had the driver's door slightly ajar, an unusual oversight that, in that moment, seemed like a divine gift. She placed Benjamin in the passenger seat and, with trembling but firm hands, started the engine. The powerful roar of the luxury car filled the silence of the garage, an explosion of adrenaline that propelled her out of there. She drove aimlessly, her eyes welling with tears, her whole body shaking, the baby crying softly beside her. Fear, responsibility, and shock mingled in an avalanche of emotions. Finally, on a quiet, remote street, she stopped the car and broke down, hugging Benjamin tightly, both crying uncontrollably. It was at that moment that Richard, who had searched every room of the mansion in a desperate hunt, entered the garage and saw the scene he would never forget. His housekeeper kneeling on the ground, his son in her arms, next to his Ferrari with the door open. The image paralyzed him, a mixture of relief and confusion. But before he could even form a question, she looked up, her eyes framed by an unspeakable panic, and pleaded, Her voice choked. "He's safe, sir, but we have to get out of here now." He had barely arrived, and the world he knew already seemed on the verge of collapsing. What did she mean, and where would they go? Ana Lucia's urgent plea echoed in the garage, a dark premonition that pierced through Richard's veil of shock. His mind, accustomed to dealing with the complexities of the stock market and managing a fortune that spanned multiple investment funds, was now in a whirlwind of primal emotions. He approached, the image of the housekeeper and his son, embraced in the oppressive stillness of that late afternoon, seared into his retina. There was a palpable sincerity in the fear emanating from her, a vulnerability that disarmed his first, instinctive reaction of suspicion. "Get out of here! Why? What happened?" He managed to stammer, his voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable to himself. Ana Lucia, still trembling, stood up with Benjamin in her arms. Her eyes, once teary, now shone with a fierce determination. "There was a man, sir. He jumped the wall. He was in the baby's room," she whispered, each terrifying word seeming to suck the air from her lungs. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The image of that man, an unknown intruder inside his home, near his son, made his heart freeze. This was his greatest asset, his true wealth, and it had been in danger. Without hesitation, Richard took out his phone and dialed 911. While he waited, his eyes scanned the garage and the car. The Ferrari, one of the most expensive symbols of his capital and successful investments, seemed insignificant before the fragility of his son. The relief of seeing him safe began to mix with a growing anger at himself for underestimating security. The guards he had dismissed to save a few $1,000s in a moment of cash flow optimization now weighed on him like crushing guilt. He looked at Ana Lucia, who still held Benjamin with a protective tenderness. She, a woman he barely saw, was now the unlikely hero of his day. He tried to compose himself, but the control he always exercised over his life and his business seemed to have slipped through his fingers. The arrival of the police transformed the mansion into a scene of controlled chaos. Red and blue lights flashed in the driveway, drawing curious glances from the neighbors. Richard tried to shield Ana Lucia from the sharp questions, but her inexperience with authorities and the emotional fragility of the moment made her an easy target. The officers, though understanding, couldn't ignore the fact that she had been found in the tycoon's Ferrari, away from the house, the baby in her arms. Her narrative, though sincere, seemed strained in places to those who didn't know her. "So you, an employee, took your boss's car, drove the child away from the house, and were only seen again hours later?" one of the detectives asked, his voice polite, but his eyes probing. Richard intervened, but the damage was done. The local tabloid headlines the next day were brutal. "Housekeeper suspected in billionaire baby's kidnapping found in Ferrari," one screamed. Richard's reputation, built on years of solid investments, aggressive stock market strategies, and a fortune in dollars, began to tarnish. His ex-fiancée, Cecilia, an ambitious woman whose interest had always revolved around his net worth, called, her voice full of concern and a hint of sarcasm. "Richard, what have you done? Your image is ruined, and what will they say about Benjamin? We can't let this woman destroy everything you've built." Cecilia's voice, once an irritating noise, now sounded like an echo of the doubt beginning to erode the foundations of his own self-confidence. Ana Lucia, for her part, felt the weight of suspicion like a rock on her chest. The headlines were a cruel reminder of her social invisibility and the ease with which her story could be twisted. In the mansion's kitchen, other staff members looked at her with distrust. Whispers, once muffled, now became more audible. "Who does she think she is? Why did she have Mr. Montgomery's car?" one of the maids said, her gaze askance. The cook, Clara, was the only one to offer her a plate of food and a look of silent solidarity. Anna Lucia felt the warmth of Benjamin's embrace, who clung to her like a little limpet, and an unexpected strength welled up inside her. She knew the truth, and for Benjamin, she would do whatever it took to prove her innocence. However, uncertainty hung in the air. The kitchen security camera, strangely deactivated on the day of the incident, was a disturbing clue that promised to reveal even darker secrets. Who would benefit from this convenient failure? And why did the doubt about her innocence seem so convenient for certain people? The mansion, once a haven of luxury and control for Richard, had transformed into a stage of silent tensions. The silence that once represented peace was now filled with whispers and sideways glances. Richard observed Anna Lucia with a new perspective. Her resilience in the face of the media accusations and the hostility from the other employees was remarkable. He, accustomed to imposing his will in the business world, where every investment was calculated and every step aimed at profit, felt powerless against the whirlwind of emotions and injustices Anna Lucia faced. His son, Benjamin, seemed to have developed an undeniable attachment to the housekeeper, crying whenever she was away, which only served to increase the complexity of the situation. One afternoon, finding her in the garden, watching over Benjamin, who slept peacefully in her arms, Richard felt an unexpected impulse. "Anna Lucia," he began, his voice less formal than usual. "I know this situation is difficult, the rumors, the police, but I believe you. I can't imagine why you would do anything to hurt Benjamin." She raised her eyes, surprised by the statement. The gratitude in her look was a balm to Richard's soul. "Thank you, sir. It's good to know someone believes me," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. In that moment, he made a decision that would later be the cause of much commentary. "I want you to stay in the house. Not in the staff quarters. I have a guest room you can use for now. It's safer for you and for Benjamin, and we can figure out what really happened." The offer, made with the best of intentions, generated a new wave of gossip and criticism. Cecilia, his ex-fiancée, wasted no time in expressing her outrage. "Richard, are you insane? Bringing that woman into your house as if she were family. People will talk. Your assets, your reputation, everything will be questioned. How do you expect me to marry you and maintain our status if you associate with that kind of people?" She screeched over the phone, her voice shrill with anger and jealousy. The elite neighbors, who once admired him for his fortune and his investments in gold and cryptocurrency, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and disapproval. The cleaning lady, occupying a guest room in the billionaire's mansion, was an unprecedented scandal in their circles. While gossip simmered outside, the police investigation proceeded slowly. The deactivated security camera remained a crucial point. One of the detectives raised the hypothesis that the intruder could be someone who knew the house's routine and knew about the system's deactivation. Richard, who had always maintained tight control over his staff, began to look at his employees with new suspicion. He had built an empire on loyalty and efficiency, but now a crack was forming in his carefully constructed world. The discovery about the possible intruder was even more disturbing. An ex-gardener, fired years earlier by his father after a disagreement over his salary and some low-yield investments. The man, named Gerald, had sworn revenge. Anna Lucia, while trying to adapt to her new and strange status, felt the weight of the other employees' stares. The guest room, though luxurious, felt like a gilded cage. She felt out of place, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Her internal conflict deepened. She felt a growing affection for Richard, not just gratitude, but something more complex, an admiration for the way he defended her, even if it cost him his reputation. But the fear of dreaming too big, of crossing the invisible line that separated their worlds, kept her on guard. How could a woman of her humble background even think of something beyond being grateful? Her fear of losing the little she had paralyzed her, preventing her from even considering the possibility of a different life. Amidst this turmoil, a second scare shook the mansion. Benjamin, who had seemed perfectly fine, suddenly fell ill with a high fever. Richard, in a panic, was preparing to take him to the hospital when Cecilia, who had arrived to offer support, intervened. "Don't worry, Richard. I'll take him. You're visibly shaken, and I know the way." Before Richard could react, she rushed out with the baby. Ana Lucia, who had witnessed the scene from the kitchen, felt a chill in her stomach. That rash action, without warning, set off an alarm in her mind. She ran to Richard, her eyes wide. "Sir, she took Benjamin. What if it's another kidnapping? What if she doesn't actually take him to the hospital?" Ana Lucia's anguish was palpable, but Richard, paralyzed by surprise and the panic of his son being sick, felt the ground beneath his feet give way again. Where was his son? And why would Cecilia act so recklessly, or worse, so calculatedly? Ana Lucia's desperation at Benjamin's sudden disappearance in Cecilia's arms was an echo of that stifling afternoon in the garage. She felt the familiar panic spread through her veins, a visceral fear that transcended her position in the house. "Sir, we have to go after him. What if Cecilia isn't really taking him to the hospital?" she insisted, her voice choked, her eyes fixed on Richard, pleading for action. Richard, still in shock from his son's high fever and Cecilia's impetuous attitude, tried to process the situation. The image of his ex-fiancée leaving with Benjamin had left him stunned. He knew Cecilia's possessive nature, her fixation on keeping up appearances and control, but he never imagined she could act so irresponsibly or with such audacity. "Ana Lucia, calm down. Cecilia is practically family. She wouldn't do anything to hurt him," Richard tried to argue, more to himself than to her, but the words sounded hollow. Her conviction, the certainty in her eyes that something was wrong, hit him like a lightning bolt. He grabbed his car keys and, without a second thought, headed towards the nearest private hospital, where Cecilia usually went. The drive was a tense silence, broken only by Ana Lucia's ragged breathing. What Richard didn't know was that, in that moment, Ana Lucia's empathy was not just for the baby, but for him too. She saw the vulnerability behind the facade of the multi-millionaire tycoon, the man who had built a fortune on high-yield investments and deals, now reduced to uncertainty about the well-being of his only son. Arriving at the hospital, the relief of finding Benjamin under the care of a medical team with Cecilia at his side was immense. The fever was being controlled, and the diagnosis was a common viral infection in babies. Cecilia, with a victorious smile, seemed to revel in the situation. "I knew Benjamin needed me. You were so flustered, Richard. What would you do without me?" she said, with a tone of superiority that deeply bothered Ana Lucia. Richard, however, was too exhausted and grateful to confront her. He took Benjamin in his arms, who, even feverish, sought comfort in Ana Lucia's lap. That scene, the baby snuggling into the housekeeper, provoked a look of disdain from Cecilia. In the following days, the press continued to follow the kidnapping case and the strange living arrangement of the housekeeper in the mansion. Richard, realizing he needed to act to contain the damage to his reputation, and most importantly, to defend Ana Lucia, called a press conference. It was an unusual move for him, a man who preferred discretion and the protection of his assets and his dollar-denominated fortune. In front of dozens of journalists and cameras, he made a bold decision. "I know there are many questions about what happened in my home, but one thing is certain: I owe my son, Benjamin's life, to the courage and instinct of Ana Lucia. She is not a suspect. She is a hero," he declared, his voice firm and charged with emotion. Richard's words reverberated through the audience. Many sympathized with the story, praising the tycoon's humility and recognizing the worth of his employee. But the city's elite reacted with veiled criticism. romanticizing an unequal relationship. Some said in the back rooms of lavish parties. It's a PR stunt to deflect from the security problems at the billionaire's mansion, others whispered. Ana Lucia, watching the press conference on television in her new room, felt a mix of pride and embarrassment. Richard's words warmed her heart, but also reminded her of the thin line that separated their worlds. Her humble origins. The lack of inheritance or treasury bonds seemed an insurmountable chasm. One quiet afternoon, while arranging some books in the library, Ana Lucia happened upon an old diary hidden among the dusty shelves. It belonged to Richard's mother, who had passed away years before. Curious, she began to read. The yellowed pages revealed the story of a strong and sensitive woman who had been a maid before marrying Richard's father. She described the challenges of being accepted into a world of wealth and how she dealt with prejudice. Dignity doesn't come from a last name, but from the courage to be who we are, Richard's mother had written on one of the pages. The words resonated deeply with Ana Lucia, as if they were direct advice for her. That evening, Ana Lucia gave the diary to Richard. As he read his mother's words, he felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. The revelations about his mother's humble origins and her silent struggles made him see his own story in a new light. He looked at Ana Lucia, their eyes meeting in a moment of profound connection. But this connection, though full of hope, would be tested by new and growing threats. Ana Lucia began to receive anonymous notes with clear and frightening messages. "Leave the house and the baby. You don't belong here." The sender, unknown, seemed determined to remove her from Richard and Benjamin's lives. Who had such a vested interest in her departure? And how did these threats fit into the web of mysteries forming around the mansion? The anonymous threats Ana Lucia began to receive were like venomous stings, undermining her already fragile sense of security. The notes, strategically left in her room, in the kitchen, and even among her clean clothes, carried a clear and frightening message. "Get out. You are not welcome here." Fear settled in her chest, but the image of Benjamin, who clung to her with childlike trust, gave her the strength to resist. She couldn't just abandon the boy. Her protective instinct was stronger than any threat. However, the internal conflict over her position and her feelings for Richard intensified. She felt that, due to her humble origins, she would never have the right to dream of a better life, or of the love of someone above her station, as her own inner voice told her. Richard, upon being informed of the threats, felt a wave of fury. The idea of someone trying to intimidate Ana Lucia, the woman who had saved his son, was intolerable. He called the chief of police, demanding a more thorough investigation. His contacts and influence, which he usually used to close high-capital deals and ensure the profitability of his investments, were now directed at protecting Ana Lucia. The detectives, armed with the notes, began a discreet internal investigation at the mansion. Suspicion fell on anyone who could have access to the house and Ana Lucia's belongings. The tension among the staff, already palpable, increased exponentially. The revelation about the author of the threats came in an unexpected and shocking way. Benjamin's former nanny, a young woman named Sophia, who had been fired months earlier by Richard due to inconsistencies in her work, reappeared at the mansion. She had followed the news and, moved by a mixture of guilt and loyalty, sought out Richard. "Sir, I know who's doing this. It's Cecilia," she confessed, her voice low, almost inaudible. Sophia explained that Cecilia had approached her before her dismissal, offering money, part of her inheritance. Cecilia had said for her to keep an eye on Ana Lucia and find something to incriminate her. The ex-fiancé was obsessed with the possibility of Richard getting involved with another woman and feared losing any chance of rekindling the relationship, eyeing his assets and the life of luxury his fortune could provide. Sophia's confession hit Richard like a blow. Cecilia, the woman he had almost married, to whom he had entrusted Benjamin, was responsible for the threats. The disappointment was profound, mixing with anger at Cecilia's manipulation and cruelty. He summoned Cecilia for a conversation, his voice cold and cutting. Faced with the evidence and Sophia's testimony, Cecilia tried to deny it, but her defensive posture and evasive eyes betrayed her. "I was only trying to protect you, Richard. That woman is no good for you, or for Benjamin. She just wants your money, your fortune," she exclaimed, her words spitting venom. Richard, however, paid no heed to her accusations. The truth was clear. Cecilia was driven by jealousy and ambition, concerned with maintaining her claim on his assets and investments. Amidst all the turmoil, an unexpected light appeared. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Eunice, a woman with white hair and kind eyes who lived next door to the mansion and whom Richard barely noticed, began to pay visits. Mrs. Eunice, who was previously ignored by the elite residents, brought homemade cookies and, more importantly, advice. "My dear," she told Anna Lucia on one of her visits, "dignity doesn't come from a last name, nor from how much gold or dollars you have in the bank. It comes from within, from your courage and your kindness. Don't let the wickedness of others dim your light." Mrs. Eunice's words resonated with the message from Richard's mother's diary, reinforcing in Anna Lucia the belief in her own worth. Regardless of her social status or access to investments, still, the shadow of public humiliation loomed over Anna Lucia. At a gala for Richard's company, an event where top investors gathered to discuss new projects and evaluate cash flow, Richard insisted that Anna Lucia accompany him as a way to show his support. She was reluctant, feeling like a fish out of water in her simple dress amidst the expensive suits and glittering jewelry. During the event, one of the most influential investors, a woman with a stern face known for her sharp mind for profit, approached Anna Lucia. "So you're the housekeeper who's been manipulating our dear Richard," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Be careful not to fly too close to the sun. No one here cares about your feelings, only about the profitability of Mr. Montgomery's businesses." Anna Lucia felt her face burn with shame. The cruel words hit her deep in the soul, reinforcing her deepest fears about her origins and the impossibility of belonging to that world. Without a word, she fled, tears streaming down her face, running out of the luxurious ballroom, leaving behind the buzz of the guests and the coldness of their judgmental gazes. But Richard, who had witnessed the scene from afar, would not let her go alone. He had seen the pain in her eyes, and in that moment, something inside him changed forever. Where would he find her? And what would he do to defend her? The public humiliation at the company gala hit Anna Lucia with the force of a punch to the gut. The investor's words, laden with contempt and prejudice, not only hurt her, but reaffirmed her deepest fears, that her humble origins condemned her to always be a stranger in a world of wealth and opportunity. She ran out of the ballroom, tears blurring her vision, her simple dress now feeling like a uniform of her shame. The coastal city, with its opulent mansions and stark social divisions, had never seemed so cruel. She just wanted to disappear, to return to the invisibility that had once protected her from the pain of exposure. Richard, however, did not let her vanish. He followed her, cutting through the crowd of investors and executives discussing stocks, funds, and the company's cash flow. He left behind the murmurs of surprise and the irritation of Cecilia, who watched the scene with furious eyes. He found her sitting on a garden bench, in the shadow of a palm tree, her small body curled in a silent sob. Upon seeing him, Anna Lucia tried to wipe her tears and stand up, but he stopped her. "Anna Lucia, please, don't get up. I saw what happened. Don't listen to that woman," he said, his voice soft but firm, reflecting a kindness she had rarely seen. He sat beside her, ignoring the curious glances from the ballroom. "She's right, sir. I shouldn't be here. I don't belong in this world," she managed to say, her voice choked with emotion. Richard looked at her, and for the first time, he saw beyond the housekeeper, beyond the social differences and the chasm of fortunes. He saw the courageous woman who had saved his son, the kindness in her eyes, the dignity in her posture. That's not true. You belong wherever your courage and your heart take you, and I will not allow anyone to treat you like that. No one has the right to diminish your worth, he stated, and the seriousness in his voice was unquestionable. He stood up, extended his hand to her, and helped her to her feet. Come on, let's go back inside. Upon returning to the ballroom, Richard surprised everyone by addressing the investor who had humiliated Ana Lucia directly. With a voice that commanded authority, but without losing his composure, he said, "Mrs. Davenport, the only person here who is out of place is someone who judges others by their origin and not by their character. Mrs. Ana Lucia is a woman of immeasurable value. She saved my son's life, something that no amount of money, no investment, no profit can buy. I demand that you treat her with the respect she deserves." The investor, accustomed to dominating conversations in business meetings, was speechless, her face red with fury and embarrassment. The room, which had previously buzzed with the sound of clinking glasses and laughter, fell silent. Ana Lucia, standing beside Richard, felt a warmth spread through her chest. That public, unconditional defense was a balm for her wounds. However, the calm was fleeting. In the days that followed, news of the incident at the party spread, and the rumors gained new strength. Cecilia, taking advantage of Richard's moment of vulnerability, acted. At the end of the third week since the kidnapping incident, she filed for guardianship, claiming that Richard was mentally unstable and that Benjamin was at risk under his care. He is making reckless decisions, associating with people of ill repute. His assets, his estate, his son, everything is in danger with that woman in the house, she argued to the media, her voice filled with false concern but with a clear objective: to regain control over Richard and, consequently, over his fortune and his heir. The case became a national headline. Coastal billionaire faces guardianship battle. Family questions mental sanity after involvement with housekeeper, screamed one newspaper. Richard's image, the successful businessman who managed millions of dollars, was being torn apart. Discussions about his businesses, his dividends, and his interest rates became secondary to the personal scandal. Ana Lucia felt she was to blame for everything, her first major hurdle, being taken seriously as a hero while being treated as a culprit, now intensified. She needed to prove her innocence without resources, allies, or a voice. And now she was also being dragged into a legal battle for Benjamin's custody. While the storm brewed, Benjamin, even at just a few months old, continued to show an unwavering attachment to Ana Lucia. He cried whenever she was away and smiled in her arms, a small ray of sunshine amidst the darkness. This pure and true attachment would be a crucial element in the battle to come. Ana Lucia looked at the baby, feeling a renewed strength. She was fighting not just for herself, but for that little being who saw her as a safe harbor. What awaited her in court? How could she, a woman invisible in the eyes of the elite, prove her worth and her truth in a system that seemed designed to silence her? The courtroom would become the next battlefield, and the stakes were higher than any investment Richard had ever made. The guardianship lawsuit filed by Cecilia plunged Richard and Ana Lucia into a legal and emotional maelstrom. The mansion, which once resonated with the silence of uncertainty, was now the stage for meetings with lawyers, strategy sessions, and the constant threat of public exposure. Richard G., accustomed to dominating boardrooms and anticipating every move of the stock market, felt like a novice on this personal battlefield where his reputation, his dollar-denominated assets, and his control over his own destiny were at stake. He prepared for the hearing with a seriousness he had never applied to a multi-million-dollar contract. knowing that what was at risk was far more valuable than any fortune. Ana Lucia, for her part, felt the weight of judgment. The sensationalist headlines painted her as an opportunist, a threat to the Montenegro family's legitimate control over their heir and their assets. She spent hours rereading the anonymous notes, each word a stab to her soul. Mrs. Eunice, the elderly neighbor, continued to be a beacon of wisdom in the darkness. "Don't you worry about what they say, my dear. The truth always finds its way, like a river that flows around the rocks but never stops moving," she advised, as the two watched Benjamin play in the garden. The former nanny, Sophia, would be a key witness, and her courage in testifying against Cecilia was a comfort. The guardianship hearing began on a cold morning, under the watchful eye of the media and a curious public. The courtroom was packed, and Ana Lucia felt the curious and judgmental stares weigh down on her. Cecilia, impeccably dressed, displayed a forced confidence, her lawyers armed with arguments about Richard's supposed instability and Ana Lucia's nefarious influence. The main focus was on Richard's ability to care for Benjamin and, consequently, the child's safety. In an environment that Cecilia painted as chaotic and dangerous, Cecilia's lawyer began his cross-examination, trying to paint Ana Lucia as an imposter, a woman who had taken advantage of Richard's vulnerability. He questioned her background, her income, her lack of capital to maintain a baby, insinuating that she was driven by self-interest. Ana Lucia, in a low but firm voice, recounted the events of that fateful afternoon, from the moment she saw the intruder jump the wall to the escape in the Ferrari. She described the terror she felt, the maternal instinct that drove her to protect Benjamin, and the pain of being accused of a crime she did not commit. The most moving moment was when she described Benjamin's cries in her arms, the warmth of his small body against hers, and how she felt responsible for his safety. Then, an unexpected turning point altered the course of the story. The judge, an experienced man with a serious demeanor, asked for Benjamin to be brought into the room. The scene that followed moved everyone. Benjamin, a baby of just a few months, was placed on the floor of the courtroom. He looked around, his curious eyes searching for a familiar face. Upon spotting Ana Lucia, who was sitting in the defendant's chair, he crawled towards her, his little arms outstretched. When she picked him up, he nestled into her shoulder, letting out a sigh of satisfaction, and a pure smile formed on his lips. He cried whenever she was away, and there, in front of everyone, he showed that Ana Lucia was his safe harbor. The audience in the courtroom sighed, some with tears in their eyes. The baby's cries, which only ceased in her arms, spoke louder than any legal argument. Cecilia watched the scene, her smile dissolving into a grimace of frustration. The judge, visibly moved, observed the undeniable connection between Ana Lucia and Benjamin. The truth, which is often obscured by arguments and financial interests, emerged there in the purity of the relationship between a woman and a baby. Richard, sitting next to his lawyer, felt a lump in his throat. He looked at Ana Lucia with Benjamin sleeping in her arms, and a certainty flooded his heart. This woman, whom he had hired to clean his house, was now an essential part of his life, a guardian of his greatest treasure. He felt his hand discreetly reach out and touch hers, a silent but profound gesture of support. But the battle was not yet won. Sophia's testimony and the evidence against Cecilia were yet to be presented, and the city's elite had not yet given up on trying to bring Richard down. What would come next? And how would this revelation affect the outcome of the trial and the future of them all? The scene of Benjamin nestling in Ana Lucia's arms in the courtroom was a silent masterstroke, shaking the foundations of Cecilia's strategy. The judge, after a brief pause, resumed the hearing, but the atmosphere had changed. The legalistic coldness had been tempered by a touch of humanity. something Richard, in his years in the ruthless world of high-capital business and stock market investments, had rarely witnessed. The undeniable connection between Ana Lucia and his son spoke volumes, transcending any accusations of self-interest or manipulation. Richard's lawyer, a shrewd and respected professional, seized the moment to introduce Sophia's testimony. The former nanny, visibly nervous but with a quiet determination, recounted how Cecilia had approached her, offering a significant sum of money, an advance on her inheritance, Cecilia had claimed, to defame Ana Lucia and create situations that could harm Richard. She detailed the instructions she received to monitor Ana Lucia and how Cecilia planned to undermine the tycoon's reputation to rekindle their engagement and thus secure her access to Richard's assets and wealth. Sophia's testimony, filled with details and dates, painted a dark portrait of Cecilia's ambition and jealousy. The anonymous threats Ana Lucia had received were also presented as evidence. A handwriting expert confirmed that the writing on the notes belonged to Cecilia, closing the net around the ex-fiancé. Cecilia's expression, once arrogant, now twisted in anger and desperation. She tried to deny it, stammering accusations against Sophia and Ana Lucia, but her words sounded increasingly empty and defensive. The judge, in a serious tone, warned her about perjury. Her credibility was in tatters, and the image of the zealous fiancé was crumbling publicly, revealing a woman driven by a wounded ego and an inordinate interest in Richard's fortune, whether in dollars, euros, or stock market investments. Richard, throughout the process, felt a profound transformation. Benjamin's vulnerability, Ana Lucia's courage, and Cecilia's disloyalty forced him to reevaluate everything. He, who once saw the world through the lens of profit and control, began to see the complexity of human emotions and the value of genuine connections. His mother's diary, which Ana Lucia had found, now made even more sense. His mother's struggles to be accepted, her words about dignity and courage, resonated with Ana Lucia's journey. He realized that his own family, which had accumulated great wealth and considerable assets over the years, was not immune to human flaws and internal conflicts. Outside the courtroom, the elderly neighbor, Mrs. Eunice, continued to support Ana Lucia. "Don't forget what I told you, girl. True wealth is what we have in our hearts, not what we keep in the bank. You have that baby's love, and that's more valuable than all the gold in the world," she said, squeezing Ana Lucia's hand. Mrs. Eunice's unlikely friendship had become a safe harbor in the storm. Meanwhile, the media, which had once vilified her, began to change its tune. The story of the heroic housekeeper, the single mother who risked everything to save a baby and who now faced a guardianship battle out of pure malice, began to move the public. Social media was flooded with messages of support for Ana Lucia and criticism of Cecilia. The image of Benjamin crawling towards Ana Lucia in the courtroom went viral, a symbol of the truth emerging from the ashes of slander. Ana Lucia, though still frightened by the exposure and the magnitude of it all, felt a new strength. She was not alone. Richard was by her side, defending her with a conviction that surprised her. Benjamin's love was a shield against the poisonous words. She realized that the second major obstacle, her own feelings for Richard, was becoming harder to ignore. The affection she felt for him was evolving into something deeper, something that both scared and attracted her. It was a love born of chaos, protection, and shared vulnerability, but she feared he only saw her with gratitude, and that the difference in their worlds was an insurmountable obstacle. How would the resolution of this trial affect their own hearts? And how would this new dynamic fit into the life of Richard, a man who was, little by little, redefining his own concept of wealth and family? The verdict, which was approaching, would bring not only legal justice, but also the possibility of a profound personal transformation. The guardianship hearing dragged on, but the atmosphere in the courtroom had changed drastically. With each testimony and piece of evidence presented, the web of lies woven by Cecilia unraveled, exposing her true nature. Richard, sitting beside Ana Lucia, felt a mix of relief and anger bubbling inside him. The woman he once thought of marrying, who aspired to share his capital and assets, revealed herself to be a petty figure, driven by self-interest and resentment. This was a type of investment he would never make. Richard's lawyer presented evidence of Cecilia's involvement in deactivating the security camera. It was discovered that, days before the kidnapping incident, she had bribed a former security employee to disable the system for a specific period, claiming it was for a surprise for Richard. The intention was to create an environment of vulnerability, then use the incident to undermine Richard's trust in Ana Lucia and, by extension, in himself. Cecilia's connection to the ex-gardener Gerald, the intruder, also came to light. She had contacted him, instigating him to act against Richard, promising a generous reward in dollars if he could give the tycoon a scare and somehow discredit the new employee. The revelation of the orchestrated plan by Cecilia to destabilize Richard and frame Ana Lucia shocked everyone. The image of innocence and concern she had tried to project completely crumbled. The judge, his voice heavy with the seriousness of the situation, made a point of highlighting the gravity of Cecilia's actions, which not only attempted to manipulate justice, but also endangered the life of a baby for selfish reasons. Cecilia, with no arguments left, broke down in tears, her accusations against Ana Lucia sounding pathetic and desperate. For Ana Lucia, the exposure of the whole truth was a relief, but also an exhausting experience. Reliving every moment of that fateful afternoon, from the panic of seeing the intruder to the moment she hugged Benjamin in the Ferrari, was like scraping an open wound. She felt the weight of emotions, the pain of injustice, and the exhaustion of having to prove her decency to a world that judged her by her social status. Her internal conflicts, the belief that she would never deserve something better, still haunted her, despite all the evidence of her courage and kindness. However, amidst this exhaustion, something new blossomed between her and Richard. During the hearing's recesses, he supported her. He brought her water, asked how she was feeling. Small gestures, but they meant a great deal to Ana Lucia. She saw the affection in his eyes, the genuine concern, and felt the barrier that separated them slowly dissolving. Richard, for his part, was increasingly aware that his perception of wealth was transforming. What he once valued, his success on the stock market, his Bitcoin fortune, his profitable investments, now seemed less important than the honesty, loyalty, and strength of character he found in Ana Lucia. The growing closeness between Richard and Ana Lucia, though discreet, did not go unnoticed. Cecilia's lawyers tried to use this to their advantage, insinuating an inappropriate and manipulative relationship, but the judge, already aware of Cecilia's plot, dismissed the accusations. The media, however, which followed every detail of the trial, began to speculate about a possible romance. Photos of Richard and Ana Lucia together, with Benjamin in their arms, graced the covers of magazines and newspapers, transforming the invisible housekeeper into a central figure in a story of love and overcoming adversity. As the hearing neared its conclusion, a new element added a layer of complexity to the plot. Richard's father, who had stayed away from the situation, hospitalized in a rehabilitation clinic after years of a reckless life that compromised part of the family inheritance, was discharged. He was a bitter man who had always disapproved of Richard's mother for her humble origins, and who saw Ana Lucia as a repetition of his son's mistake. His presence, a man of immense wealth but a hardened heart, promised more conflict. The resolution of the trial was near. The truth had been exposed, and justice seemed inevitable for Cecilia. But for Ana Lucia and Richard, the verdict would be just the beginning of a new journey. How would they deal with the world's gaze, with social pressure, and with the growing feelings between them? And how would Richard's father's return influence Benjamin's future and the newfound connection between Ana Lucia and Richard? The legal outcome was merely the preface to a much deeper and more complex personal transformation. With the overwhelming evidence and testimony against Cecilia, the conclusion of the guardianship trial was imminent. The judge, after a period of deliberation, read the verdict. Benjamin's guardianship would remain with Richard Montgomery, and the accusations of mental instability were unfounded. Furthermore, Cecilia would be prosecuted for perjury and for her malicious actions, which had endangered a child's life. The relief on Richard's face was palpable. But in Ana Lucia, a mixture of exhaustion and quiet joy manifested. The dignity she felt she had lost under the weight of the accusations was beginning to be restored. Despite the legal victory, the social and emotional turmoil persisted. The return of Richard's father, Mr. Arthur Montgomery, to the mansion after his discharge from the rehabilitation clinic added a new layer of tension. Arthur was a strong-willed man who had built part of the family fortune with investments in gold and other commodities, and he had a very particular view on the purity of bloodline and social status. He regarded Ana Lucia with suspicion and contempt, seeing her as an intruder who threatened the Montgomery legacy and name. "That woman has no place here, Richard. She is a servant. We cannot allow her to compromise our image and our inheritance," he would bellow, reminding Richard of his responsibility to the family's assets. Richard, however, was no longer the same man who lived under the shadow of his father's expectations. The journey with Ana Lucia had transformed him. He had learned to see beyond appearances, beyond wealth and status. He stood up to his father, defending Ana Lucia with a conviction that surprised even himself. "Father, Ana Lucia saved Benjamin's life. She is more family than many who carry our last name, and her dignity cannot be measured by assets or investment funds," he declared, his voice firm, marking new territory in his relationship with Arthur. This confrontation created an even greater chasm between father and son, but solidified the alliance between Richard and Ana Lucia. Amidst these tensions, the connection between Ana Lucia and Richard deepened. The exchanged glances, the discreet smiles when Benjamin slept in her arms, the way he defended her against Arthur's cruel words, all of this nurtured the affection she felt, transforming it into something more. Her internal conflict, the fear of dreaming of the love of someone above her reality, intensified. She found herself increasingly drawn to him, but the voice of reason, forged by years of hardship and the belief that she was not worthy of such affection, prevented her from even considering the possibility of a future together. Her personal net worth was zero, while his spanned multiple currencies and profitable investments. One afternoon, while caring for Benjamin, Ana Lucia found herself reflecting on the words of Mrs. Eunice and those from Richard's mother's diary. "Dignity doesn't come from a last name, and true wealth is in the heart." These phrases became a mantra in her mind, a counterpoint to the voice that reminded her of her limitations. She began to realize that her greatest strength was her empathy, her courage, and the unconditional love she felt for Benjamin. The former nanny, Sophia, now working as an assistant at a daycare, called Ana Lucia, offering support and telling her what an inspiration she was to women who were also fighting for their rights. The public, following the story, remained divided. While the majority was moved by Ana Lucia's story of overcoming adversity, the city's elite criticized the romanticization of social inequality and Richard's bad example. He received emails from investors questioning his decisions, claiming his image was becoming unprofessional and that it could affect the profitability of his businesses. Richard, however, seemed indifferent. His priority now was to protect Ana Lucia and Benjamin, and he was willing to face the consequences. The outcome of the guardianship trial brought a new lease on life, but Ana Lucia's personal battle against her own fears was far from over. She had proven her innocence, but how would she prove to herself that she deserved to love and be loved, regardless of her fortune or social position? And how would Richard, a man who resigned for the first time in his life, allowing himself to feel and be vulnerable, handle the pressure from his father and the expectations of his world to follow his own heart? The connection between them was undeniable, but the path to a future together seemed fraught with emotional and social obstacles, more complex than any challenge on the stock market. What would it take for them to allow themselves to love, for Ana Lucia to finally recognize her own worth, and for Richard to break the chains of the past? The tension in the Montgomery mansion was almost palpable, a heavy fog that hung over the opulence of the halls and gardens. Mr. Arthur, intransigent in his convictions about social hierarchy and the value of inheritance, continued to distill his discontent with Ana Lucia's presence. To him, she was a stain on the family's reputation, a threat to the good name of their businesses and the soundness of their assets. "You are tarnishing the family name, Richard. Our entire fortune, our legacy is at risk because of a servant," he would bellow, his voice echoing through the corridors, reminding Richard of every cent in dollars and euros the family had accumulated. Richard, however, remained firm. With each of his father's attacks, his defense of Ana Lucia became more forceful. He had spent his entire life seeking paternal approval, building an empire with investment strategies and an enviable cash flow. But now, his priority was different. He saw in Ana Lucia a strength, a truth he had never found in his world of stock market transactions and multi-million-dollar deals. The affection for Benjamin and the respect for Ana Lucia became the anchor of his new reality. Ana Lucia, for her part, felt the impact of Mr. Arthur's words. Although Richard defended her, the constant hostility hurt her deeply, reinforcing her oldest fears about her inadequacy. She questioned whether she truly deserved to be there, whether she was causing more problems than solutions. The inner voice that reminded her of her humble origins and her lack of assets grew stronger, almost to the point of convincing her to give up and walk away, to erase herself again to protect the little she had, her dignity and the baby's peace. Mrs. Eunice, the wise neighbor, noticing Ana Lucia's anguish, paid a visit carrying a tray of cookies and words of encouragement. "My dear, we don't choose where we come from, but we can choose where we go. And love, love, it doesn't understand last names or bank accounts. It simply is." The elderly woman's simple words were like a balm to Ana Lucia's soul, reminding her of the strength that resided in her own heart, and that true wealth was not in investments or profits. Despite the turmoil, the routine with Benjamin was a refuge. The baby, growing strong and healthy, showed an unconditional love for Ana Lucia, crying whenever she was away and falling asleep peacefully in her arms. This pure and unshakable connection was proof of the bond that united them, which would become increasingly evident to everyone. Richard, observing the scene, felt a mixture of gratitude and an emotion he couldn't name. He realized that Ana Lucia was not just his son's guardian, she was, in some way, the guardian of his own soul. One day, while Benjamin slept, Richard found Ana Lucia sitting on the porch, her eyes lost on the horizon. He approached, and the silence between them was comfortable, filled by the coastal breeze. "Ana Lucia," he began, his voice low, "I know my father has been difficult, but I want you to know that his words mean nothing to me. I trust you, and I care about you more than you can imagine." Ana Lucia turned to him, her eyes wide, her heart beating erratically. Richard's "I care" was more than gratitude. It was a veiled confession, a glimpse of a feeling she dared not dream of. However, Richard's past still haunted him. He had built a wall around himself, a protection against emotional wounds. His mother, though loved, had been a source of constant family friction due to her background. Richard's father had never accepted that she lacked a family inheritance or substantial investments. The vulnerability he felt now, opening up to Ana Lucia, was both frightening and liberating. He feared that any misstep could further damage his reputation, and more importantly, that she might not see him as truly trustworthy, given the disparities in their realities. As their relationship deepened, a final unexpected obstacle arose. A group of tabloid journalists, instigated by Mr. Arthur and Cecilia, published a series of defamatory articles about Ana Lucia, using distorted information from her humble past, her simple former home, and her struggles to find a good job. The articles painted her as a manipulative woman, a gold digger preying on Richard's fortune, interested in his money, his dividends, and his interest payments. The impact was devastating, reigniting the debates about her innocence and the immorality of the relationship between her and Richard. Ana Lucia, who had started to allow herself to dream, felt once again thrown to the edge of the abyss. How would she face this new wave of slander and prove her purity of intentions, not just to others, but to herself? And how would Richard protect her from an attack aimed at destroying not only her image, but also her soul? The climax was approaching, and the truth about the strength of love and dignity was about to be tested in a definitive way. The new wave of defamatory articles hit Ana Lucia with the force of a tidal wave. The lies and distortions about her humble past, published by journalists eager for a scandal, threw her back into a whirlwind of pain and insecurity. She felt the weight of every word, every insinuation that she was a gold digger, interested in Richard's money, dividends, and assets. The inner voice that tormented her with the idea that she didn't deserve happiness, that her place was in the shadows, gained strength again, threatening to swallow her whole. Richard, seeing Ana Lucia's suffering, felt a rage he had never experienced. Those articles were not just an attack on her reputation, they were an attack on the dignity, kindness, and courage he so admired. He knew that Mr. Arthur and Cecilia were behind the smear campaign, trying at all costs to destabilize him and drive him away from Ana Lucia. He, who had built his fortune with intelligence and strategy on the stock market, now saw his personal world invaded by a calculated malice that seemed to have no limits. "We can't let this get to you, Ana Lucia. They're trying to tear you down, but I won't let them," Richard said, his voice filled with a fierce determination. He summoned his lawyers and his communications team, planning a legal and media counter-offensive. This time, he wouldn't just defend her, he would go to war for her. The wealth he possessed, the capital he had accumulated, would be used not for profit, but to protect what was most valuable in his life. While the legal battle unfolded, Ana Lucia found comfort in the small moments. Benjamin, now taking his first wobbly steps, would seek her out with a smile, his little arms outstretched. The baby's pure and unconditional love was a balm to her wounded soul, a constant reminder that her struggle had a greater purpose. Mrs. Eunice, ever present, brought herbal teas and stories of resilience, reminding her that life, like the sea, had its tides, but the strength to endure came from within. The climax of the emotional tension came in a new public confrontation, a televised debate organized by a major news channel. Richard was invited to speak about his company's challenges and the controversy surrounding his personal life. To everyone's surprise, he insisted that Ana Lucia accompany him, despite the risk of more attacks. "She is part of my story, and I will not hide her," he declared to his team, his decision unwavering. On the day of the debate, Ana Lucia was nervous, her heart pounding. The studio was filled with cameras and journalists. The host, a journalist known for his sharp questions, began to question Richard about his relationship with the housekeeper and the consequences for his investments and his billionaire image. Richard, however, remained calm. He spoke of Ana Lucia's courage, of the value of loyalty, and of how true wealth lay in human connections, not in material possessions or cash flow. Then, the host, following a script planned by Mr. Arthur and Cecilia, displayed a segment of the defamatory articles on the screen, with photos of Ana Lucia in her former humble home, insinuating that she was taking advantage of Richard's fortune. The audience murmured, and Mr. Arthur, watching the debate from home, smiled victoriously. Ana Lucia felt her face burn with shame, tears welling in her eyes. She was about to flee the stage, as she had at the company gala, but before she could move, Richard took her hand. His grip firm and reassuring, he looked into the host's eyes, and then at the camera with an intensity that silenced everyone. "Ana Lucia is not taking advantage of my fortune," he began, his voice resonating with authority and emotion. "She is the greatest fortune I have ever had. She taught me what truly matters in life, and if my father, or anyone else, thinks that my assets, my capital, or my stocks are worth more than the dignity and honor of this woman, then they understand nothing about the value of a life." Then Richard did something that surprised everyone, including Ana Lucia. He turned to her, held her hands tenderly, and in front of the cameras and millions of viewers, revealed a secret he had kept in his heart. "Ana Lucia, since the day you saved Benjamin, my life has changed. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know I don't want to live a single day without you and Benjamin by my side. I love you." The sincere and courageous declaration left everyone in shock. Ana Lucia, her eyes welling with tears, felt the world stop. The love she had been so afraid to dream of was now a reality, proclaimed loud and clear by a man she had considered unattainable. But this declaration, as liberating as it was, would open new doors to even greater challenges, and the reaction of Mr. Arthur, the elite, and Ana Lucia herself to this public revelation was still an unknown. How would society react to this breaking of social barriers, and how would Ana Lucia, with her love now exposed, finally allow herself to live this feeling? Richard's declaration of love, broadcast nationally, was a lightning bolt that tore through social conventions and the invisible walls that separated Ana Lucia from his world. The silence in the television studio was absolute for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Ana Lucia, her heart pounding, felt tears stream freely. The love she had feared to dream of, that she believed she had no right to feel, was here, real, powerful, and proclaimed by a man she saw as unattainable. That moment, in front of millions, was the resolution of a deep internal conflict. She was not alone, and her worth did not depend on her origins or her assets. Richard, after his declaration, did not take his eyes off Ana Lucia. The fear of her reaction mingled with the certainty that he had done the right thing. He felt light, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The audience, initially shocked, erupted in applause. The story of the housekeeper who saved the billionaire's son and won his heart, breaking barriers of class and prejudice, touched the souls of many. Mr. Arthur's reaction, however, was one of uncontrollable rage. In his mansion, he threw the remote control at the television, shattering it against the wall. His face, already marked by bitterness, contorted in a fit of anger. "He's lost his mind, completely insane. He's destroyed the family's reputation, our assets, everything we've built," he yelled, feeling that all the wealth and investments in gold, cryptocurrency, and stocks were devaluing with his son's shame. Cecilia, who was with him, tried to console him, but her own plans had completely crumbled. In the days that followed, the repercussion of Richard's declaration was overwhelming. Social media was flooded with messages of support and celebration of a love that defied social norms. Ana Lucia's story became a phenomenon, inspiring women who, like her, felt invisible or voiceless. The media outlets that had once defamed her were forced to change their tune, acknowledging the authenticity and courage of Richard and Ana Lucia. The articles now spoke of a love that transcends class, and the billionaire who found his true wealth. For Ana Lucia, the public recognition was a balm. The public wounds, the accusations, and the humiliations still hurt, but Richard's validation, the love he showed, slowly healed them. She began to allow herself to dream, not just of a future for Benjamin, but for herself. Gratitude transformed into a mature, reciprocal love. The fear of erasing herself because of her humble origins gave way to the certainty that she was worthy of loving and being loved, and that her story, with all its hardships, had prepared her for this moment. Richard, for his part, felt a freedom that money and power had never given him. He began to question the foundations of his own success, realizing that his life had been driven by a relentless pursuit of more capital, more profit, more assets. But that true happiness lay in something much simpler and more profound. He dedicated more time to Benjamin, playing with him in the garden, reading stories, and learning to be a present father, something he had neglected in his incessant pursuit of business success. The former nanny, Sophia, was reinstated to the mansion's staff, now with a new position and more responsibilities, showing that loyalty and truth were rewarded. Mrs. Eunice, the elderly neighbor, continued her visits, bringing not only treats, but also the wisdom that life had taught her. See, my dear, you always reap what you sow, and you sowed love and courage. The main conflicts were resolved satisfactorily. Cecilia, after the perjury trial, lost much of her credibility and was forced to face the consequences of her actions. Mr. Arthur, though still reluctant to accept the situation, began to observe Benjamin's happiness and the positive change in his son. Gradually, the barrier around his heart, though not completely broken, began to yield in small places, faced with the evidence of his family's genuine happiness. On a sunny afternoon, with Benjamin sleeping peacefully in Ana Lucia's arms as Richard watched them both, holding her hand, they both felt that their journey had reached a safe harbor, that love, born of chaos and the instinct to protect, had blossomed and solidified. Nothing would be the same because both of their lives had been transformed. Ana Lucia, the invisible housekeeper, was now visible and loved. Richard, the lonely tycoon, had found his true family. But what did the future hold for them? And how would they build a new legacy, based on values that went far beyond material wealth and financial transactions? The final chapter of this story was about to be written, and with it, the promise of a new beginning, full of hope and meaning. The morning sun flooded the mansion, bathing the rooms in a light that seemed to renew everything it touched. The lives of Ana Lucia and Richard had been irreversibly transformed, and the house, once a sanctuary of control and discretion for the tycoon, now pulsed with the life and warmth of a family. The love that blossomed from chaos had taken deep root, and the challenges they overcame had strengthened them, uniting them in a way they could never have foreseen. Society, once critical and divided, began to adapt to the new reality of Richard and Ana Lucia. The whispers of the elite gave way to a reluctant respect, and their story became a testament that love and dignity could indeed transcend social and financial barriers. Richard, with Ana Lucia by his side, continued to manage his businesses, but with a renewed perspective. His decisions were no longer driven solely by profit or capital, but also by a sense of social responsibility and empathy. He began to invest in social inclusion projects, using part of his fortune and cash flow to create opportunities for people who, like Ana Lucia, had been marginalized by society. His actions, which once focused exclusively on profitability, now had a profound social impact. Ana Lucia, for her part, embraced her new role with the same courage and sensitivity that had guided her throughout her journey. She was no longer the invisible housekeeper, but a woman with a voice and a purpose. With Richard's support, she founded an organization that helped vulnerable women, offering them education, psychological support, and employment opportunities. The words from Richard's mother's diary, "Dignity doesn't come from a last name, but from the courage to be who we are," became the motto of her organization, and she dedicated herself to showing every woman that her worth was intrinsic, regardless of her origin or assets. Mr. Arthur, Richard's father, was undoubtedly the slowest to accept the transformation. At first, he maintained his distant and critical stance, but Benjamin's contagious joy and the sight of Richard's genuine happiness began to break down the walls of his hardened heart. He would watch Benjamin, who now called Ana Lucia Mommy and Richard Daddy, and a warmth he had forgotten existed began to fill him. One afternoon he surprised everyone by approaching Ana Lucia and, his voice hoarse with emotion, apologizing. "I was wrong about you, Ana Lucia. My vision was small. You are an extraordinary woman." That moment, the reconciliation with Mr. Arthur was an important closure for the family, showing that love and forgiveness could overcome even the most ingrained prejudices. Benjamin grew up surrounded by love and security, a happy and curious child without the shadows of the past hanging over him. He had a loving mother in Ana Lucia and a present father in Richard, who taught him not only about the business world, but also about the importance of kindness, justice, and empathy. The baby who had united two such different worlds became the link of a family brought together by adversity and love. On a quiet afternoon, with the sun setting over the ocean, Ana Lucia and Richard walked hand in hand through the mansion's garden, Benjamin running ahead of them, laughing as he chased a butterfly. The red Ferrari, which had once been a symbol of wealth and social division, was now parked in the garage, a silent reminder of the escape that had united them. But now, the car represented something more. The vehicle of a salvation that transcended the material, a bridge between worlds, a symbol that life could surprise, uniting the unexpected and the unspeakable. Ana Lucia looked at Richard, her eyes shining with a love she never imagined possible. He looked back at her, his eyes reflecting the same intensity. They had lost so much, suffered so much, but they had found each other in the process. Richard's transformation from a man focused on his assets and liabilities to someone who valued the intangible was complete. And Ana Lucia, who had felt unworthy of dreaming, now dreamed with her eyes open of a future built on the foundation of love, courage, and resilience. Their life was proof that true fortune was not measured in dollars or gold, but in the richness of a heart that allowed itself to love and the strength of a spirit that refused to be broken. They had found their true home, not in a luxurious mansion, but in each other, and in that little Benjamin who was living proof that love, even born from chaos, was the greatest fortune of all.